going to try to start going. Kenneth, does it look like we're recording? It would appear that we are. Okay. I checked one little box. That's the frustrating thing about teaching these online courses, because there's always some little bitty box somewhere on some screen that you forgot to check that just messes everything up. In one of my other classes where we have quizzes, I had told them that I would open up the quizzes after the fact so they could read back over the questions before their test, and there was one little box on one little screen somewhere in the middle of 99 programming screens that I missed and didn't check, and I actually had to call technical support to figure out what I had missed, but I think that it's working now. So anyway, all that to say, most of the time when there are errors in the class, it's because I have missed something in the process of setting it up and don't even realize it until you bring my attention to it. So when you do have opportunity to ask a question about something that doesn't look right, please don't hesitate to do so, because usually it's just plain ignorance on my part. And the longer you go to school, the more you realize how little you really know. So it helps me to have you bring things to my attention that I have missed somewhere along the line. All right. Well, the recording, I think, is running now fairly smoothly, hopefully. And we'll go ahead and transition into our call. Thank you, the four of you, for giving your time tonight to be part of the call. And again, if Will's able to join us, we'll kind of pause where we are and give him a quick intro and see what his early thoughts are on this. But we're going to pick up here with the discussion of the week. And I think Lauren had to fly solo on this one because her partner was inactive in class for a little while for a number of different reasons, and she has pretty well prepared this for us this week, and I appreciate her being willing to do that by herself. Just as a forewarning, next week's going to be the same. Morgan Bell has next week's discussion, and the person who had originally signed up to work with her on the development of that topic ended up having to withdraw from the class because of some personal reasons. So Morgan's working on next week's topic by herself, but what I have seen of it initially looks every bit as good as the ones that we've seen so far. So it's not necessarily a detriment to have to do this thing by yourself. Lauren may attest to the fact that you don't have to worry about getting somebody else's buy-in or upon things. It may be a little bit easier that way, but I got to think through what's going to happen the second part of the semester when we go through round 2 of this, because we're missing 2 people from the original plan, and that is going to change the way I do things just a little bit. Anyway, we will turn it over to Lauren at this point. If you will, please, ma'am, unmute your mic and give us some thoughts to give us the background on the topic. And then we'll start kind of talking about what folks think about the issue.
So, hey, the topic this week is obviously about minimum wage and whether it is a good thing to raise it or not. And I kind of found within like all the research, I don't know, I kind of found myself kind of stuck because like I can see both sides, like where it would be good to raise it, but then I find myself leaning more towards not raising it. And I think the reason why there's a lot of people that are for it and then there's people that aren't for it. I think with President Obama actually has a thing. It was Fight for 15, where they're wanting to raise it to $15 an hour, which in reality sounds awesome because, I mean, if I went to a job and they're like, we're going to pay you $15 an hour, I'd be like, okay, sign me up now. But then when you start looking into the I guess the backstory of it, like if it's raised, a lot of other things are going to be affected because employers are going to have to pay, they're going to have to adjust their budget, and then also the unemployment, because I don't think employers are going to be able to hire as many people as they may want if the minimum wage is higher. And also consumer goods, the prices of that will rise. And I don't know about you, but I don't necessarily want to pay $8 for a gallon of milk. But I mean, I think eventually the minimum wage is going to have to be raised because, I mean, as time goes on, I just think it's just an adjustment thing to kind of adjust to the cost of living and whatnot. But I don't, I don't know. I would say right now, I don't think it's a good idea to raise it.
All right. That's a pretty good opening. What is the minimum wage right now federally?
$7.25.
$7.25?
Mm-hmm. And it started out when it was FDR that made, I guess, a law or whatever, and it started out at 25 cents. So it's come a long way.
All right. Well, the discussion board is already open, and a few folks have started to put some ideas out there. What do we think? From an HR perspective, if senior management says, I've been reading about this minimum wage thing, what do you think we ought to do?
I don't know, I guess right off the bat, it really depends on the organization that we are. Am I a pizza chain, a regional pizza chain, or am I a fairly large small business? One of the things that I kind of picked up on in reading the article, actually, I started reading one article and then I kind of went off on a tangent with the SeaTac Washington raising their minimum wage to $15.15. And one of the points that was made in the article was, yes, the minimum wage was raised to $15, but there was a particular company that was already paying their employees above and beyond that minimum rate, so it wasn't too much of an impact. But the issue that they went into as the article went on was that you have a pay differential between, let's say, a housekeeper 1 and a housekeeper 2. If you bump up the pay for housekeeper 1 and now 1 and 2 make about the same, you have the issue where HR basically has to go back and redo the job analysis. Well, the compensation professionals have to go back and redo the compensation schematics to reset everybody's pay, because there should be some differentiation.
Okay. What else? All right, Kenneth, your mic's not open right now.
I know.
Okay, looked like you were talking and your mic wasn't open there. All right, well, Ariel, what do you think?
Can you repeat the question one more time before I answer it?
Okay. What do you think about a global push to raise the minimum wage from an HR perspective? What do you see are the positives and what are the negatives for the company?
I think the positive for the company is they increase the minimum wage, is that they have more profits, I think, within the company. But also, will it be a negative thing? I also think that I think kind of tough question, but
it is. Now you're HR, and senior management has said we've been reading about this. It hasn't gone into law yet, so we don't have to. Why should we do it before they tell us to? What would be the answer? Why should we raise our company minimum wage before the federal government tells us that we absolutely have to?
I think if we do it before, the HR or anybody before they pass the law, I think that everybody will start applying for jobs. Also, I think that it'd be a good thing for the company.
Okay. Why? Lauren.
One of the things I was reading for the company, it would be good for employers because it would boost employee morale and also the retaining rate, like you would keep employees there. But then the con of that, kind of like what I said earlier, is that they might not be able to, their unemployment rate's probably going to rise and your turnover rate's not going to be that great. So I don't know if that kind of helps out Ariel a little bit. But.
Okay.
All right. Ashley.
To go back to your question of why we should do it before the federal government makes us do it, I think one of the benefits there would be we have the time to go back and redefine our pay grades and the pay structure. If it's put into effect, we don't really have, I mean, we have time, but it's just their time limit. If we go ahead and start looking at it, we're not as pressed for time and we can work out the kinks.
Okay. What you tend to find in most of these discussions about raising the minimum wage is, and let me approach this a little differently. Most of the time, when we immediately are against the idea, in our mind, we're paying 7.25 today, and we're paying 15 tomorrow. But that's usually not the case. Normally, it is a gradual increase over a period of years. It'll jump to like 10 this year, and then to a 11.50, and then 13, and then 15. So over the course of about 4 or 5 years, we're going to hit that. And that's one thing that we don't always take into account, is that it's not an immediate hit. It's a gradual phase in over time. So the hurt, so to speak, of the increased wages isn't as drastic right now as we might tend to think it is when we just read the headline. But the hit is still there. One thing that comes to mind as to why we might proactively do this before we have to is that it can be a real good PR thing, can it? And a couple of you were kind of talking about this. If we are seen as the more progressive paying company in the community, people are going to want to work for us. There are certainly folks who want to work for some place that is a solid company, that is a growth potential, that will challenge you, and those kinds of things, a lot of intrinsic kinds of things. But there are certainly a lot of people that really just want to work for whatever place they can make the most money, even if they end up with a job that they're not really happy at. Money trumps happiness for some people. And for those people, especially, our choice to raise the minimum wage on our own is going to be seen as a very positive thing. Is that going to make it easier for HR to fill jobs? No, why not? Kenneth.
Well, if I'm at a company and we just arbitrarily raise it to 15, now you've just got a whole bunch of people that are just applying for the job because they know that they can make a significantly greater amount of money than just going to McDonald's or just going to another agency or place that maybe doesn't pay as much.
Okay. When I first asked the question, Ashley was shaking her head no, that it won't necessarily be easier on HR. Tell me why you were shaking your head no.
I had the same reason as Kenneth, on top of the fact that you're probably going to be getting a much wider span of skilled workers. You're probably going to be getting people that, like Kenneth said, just want to make a greater amount of money but may not really have the skills for it. You're just adding on top of the paperwork.
Okay. Do most jobs have knowledge, skills, and abilities that are requirements for the position?
Yeah.
Do you think that for most jobs, there are folks who apply that don't meet those minimum specifications?
Yes.
Does a relatively perceived high-paying job cause more people who are not really qualified to apply for it? Probably.
Mhm.
The fact that it has a $15 an hour wage would potentially cause a lot of people who aren't qualified for that job to apply for it. And that's going to make it harder on HR, isn't it? You know, where we did have 50 applications for this one job, we might now have 250. So that will be a little more challenging. Kenneth?
Well, I mean, it in a sense, yes, but on the same sense, no, because I can imagine with the initial deluge of applications, let's say the company decides to invest in an electronic processing system. Yes, it's an increase in cost, but I would rather sink cost into maybe a one-time charge off for a program than to have to bring in, 5, 6 more people to go through all of these applications to hopefully find somebody that's qualified to fill a job.
Okay. If we let's take it from the perspective that we're going to kind of go along grudgingly. If they tell us we have to, we'll do it, but we're not going to proactively do it on our own. If we are encouraged or mandated to gradually step up our pay wages, what are some of the consequences or the collateral damage that happens as we do that? Where do we as an organization run the risk of having some hurts? Kenneth's trying here, but I'm not hearing anything.
Are you asking from an HR perspective or overall business perspective?
Right now, from an overall business perspective.
I mean, the easy answer is it's an increase in overall cost because
Okay.
now it costs more to operate this business than it did yesterday.
Okay. And it's not an easy mathematical calculation to do. How much is it going to increase? When we think about raising the minimum wage to 15, we're not, somebody kind of mentioned this earlier. It's not just identifying the 7 1/4s and calculating their rate at 15, is it? Because we've also got 7 1/2s and 8s and 8 1/2s and 9s and 9 1/2s and 10s and so on and so on and so on, all the way up to 15. And all of them, not just the minimum wages, get raised to 15, don't they? So it's a bigger hit than just that subset that's at minimum wage. But as somebody else was saying in the conversation earlier, why do we have those steps of pay where somebody is at 7 1/4 but somebody else is at 8?
I think it's because they're like their skill level and then like what they're because somebody who's getting paid more, they're more skilled and they're more trained to do that job than somebody else who's just entering into the workforce or somebody who just entered into the company that doesn't know how to necessarily
Okay.
do that.
So their skill and experience is a big part of why they're getting paid 8 instead of 7 1/4. What else? Somebody mentioned this earlier. Why else is somebody getting 8 instead of 7 1/4? When they both clean our hotel rooms. Come on, somebody talked about this earlier. We got two people who clean our hotel rooms, and one of them makes more than the other.
One may be not necessarily a supervisor, but a team lead.
Okay, that's getting to it. What else, Lauren?
Their education.
Maybe.
Their talent and ability to perform the job.
Ability to perform the job. Okay. What I'm kind of thinking in terms of y'all are kind of getting on it here. We have to create within our job sets opportunities for advancement, don't we? You go to work for the Windsor here in Americus, cleaning rooms, you want to be able to grow somehow. So you start out as a maintenance specialist 1, and then at some point you get promoted to maintenance specialist 2, and then you're a senior maintenance specialist, and you're basically still doing the same job, but over the course of time we give you a new title to justify a little bit higher wages. And that creates some separation. Now, all of a sudden, everybody is gone to 15, and there's a new baseline. Is the senior maintenance specialist happy that the entry-level maintenance specialist 1 is making the same wage?
Of course not.
Of course not, right?
He's been there for 3-4 years, and he's earned his way to 15, whereas this next just got here yesterday and he's getting 15.
So what does that senior maintenance specialist expect us to do?
Raise his wage. Raise his salary.
Okay, to something higher than 15, right?
Mm-hmm.
What about the people who are making $15.50? We don't have to do anything to them, do we? Because they're above the minimum.
Mm-mm.
But they were getting twice what the other person was made, and now they're getting 50 cents an hour more than what that person's made. So they kind of expect we're going to raise them too. So one of the maybe unintended, maybe behind the scenes intended consequences of raising the minimum wage is that it doesn't just impact the people who are at minimum wage, it impacts a whole lot of people who aren't far from the minimum wage. And it impacts people who are within about, 7,500% higher than the minimum wage. So if we raise to 15, we got to realistically be thinking about anybody who makes less than 20, probably, don't we? Because there's a gap for a reason. There's a gap because of education. There's a gap because of seniority. There's a gap because of skill level. And we have to be able to approximate those differences in order for equity to seem fair within the organization. All right.
I think it's hard to when somebody comes in and say I come in with a 4-year degree in HR, and then say somebody comes in and they don't have a degree or something, and then we're getting paid the same thing, then that's I guess it's kind of like what you're saying. It's just not viewed as necessarily fair.
Okay.
Frustrating, I guess.
What would you guess is a reasonable starting salary for somebody with a college degree? Now, again, it's going to vary a lot depending on what the degree was, right? But if you just had to kind of the average of most, you throw out the real high ones and the engineers and whatnot, and you throw out the lower ones, what's kind of you think ballpark that you ought to be reasonably looking at when you come out of college?
13, 15, maybe?
In terms of an annual number?
Oh. 50 to 60,000, maybe?
50 to 60 coming out of college?
Maybe. I don't know. I'm probably thinking too much. I don't know.
Your sights may be a little bit high, but depending on where you go and depending on what your degree was, that may be reasonable. That may be higher than the average, though. Kenneth, what do you think?
30?
Well, I mean, that's the part that had me kind of pause because if you were in DC, Washington, DC, Lauren wouldn't necessarily be that far off. But here in Atlanta, I would probably say anywhere between 32 and 37, maybe.
Okay. Cost of living certainly makes a difference, but cost of living doesn't impact minimum wage, does it? Minimum wage is minimum wage wherever you are. Minimum wage in New York City is the same as minimum wage in San Francisco, which is the same as the minimum wage in Americus, Georgia. $15 is $15, right? Generally speaking, do you think maybe 35 to 40, perhaps? Kenneth, I think, said 32, 37, somewhere in that range is not unreasonable for a college graduate?
Starting off because, after X amount of time, you're going to get, you with a degree making that much, you should reasonably expect to get bumps in pay along the way.
All right. Has anybody grabbed a calculator at all during the discussion of this minimum wage thing?
I got a calculator on my phone.
Okay, I do too. I just got mine. Do you know what $15 an hour translates to if you work a 40-hour week all year long?
$31,200.
$31,000 if that minimum wage person works a 40-hour week all year long. That's assuming there's no overtime. So basically what we're saying is, without asking you ahead of time to figure out the math part of this, you said that it's not unreasonable for a college graduate to make about 35. And yet, one of the arguments that is very strong against raising the minimum wage to 15 is that suddenly somebody who probably, in some cases, didn't complete high school is making within a few $1,000s of what a college graduate makes. Kenneth, I'm not going to ask you to reveal salaries or something, but what's reasonable for an enlisted man in the armed services to make annually? If you can remember that far back.
So I will share this. And this might have been like 3 or 4 months ago. I was going through some old paperwork and documentation, and my wife pulled one of my old LESs, and she was like, "So this $500, when did you make this?" And I was like, "That's how much I made over the course of 2 weeks." And she was like, "You only got $1,000 a month?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, because in the military, what they say is when you get out is, yes, you have your base pay, but then you factor in the benefits like housing and meals and housing, meals, just a lot of other benefits that kind of play into it. So coming out of the military, on average, the lower ranking guys, in their pocket, they're making at least 40, depending on whether or not they stay on or off base.
Okay. All right. So one of the arguments I hear against minimum wage is that we are suddenly paying a McDonald's burger flipper almost as much as we're paying somebody in our military. And granted, they may have the same amount of education, but the argument, one of the biggest arguments against minimum wage, especially drastic increases over a short period of time, is that it removes anything that is normally tied to value of jobs. Some jobs, we would argue, deserve to be paid more than other jobs. And when we have a federally dictated minimum wage, suddenly lots and lots of jobs are even leveled across the playing field when they shouldn't be. What do you think is one of the primary arguments that supporters of minimum wage use to justify raising it? There's a couple. Who's first?
What about the cost of living?
Okay. It's reasonable to pay somebody more because the cost of living keeps going up, right? Okay, that argument helps to support the idea of raising the minimum, but not necessarily to 15. Ashley.
Don't they claim that it'll like stimulate the economy because you have more spending money, so you inevitably spend more money?
Okay. Part of the argument is that if I have $15 after working this hour instead of $7.25, I have more money that I can spend. Certainly. What else?
They believe it's going to create more jobs, and then also that people won't spend as much on government welfare too.
Okay. It will create more jobs, and the government will have to spend less on benefit programs because you can earn it now instead of getting it from the government. Okay. What else? I think those are most of them, and as just a general rule, those are all pretty legitimate arguments, aren't they? I mean, who wouldn't want to have more money in the economy, which comes as a result of having more money in your paycheck? That's a pretty easy argument, isn't it? What are the arguments against it?
Job cuts.
Okay. One of the arguments for it that I forgot to mention just a second ago is this belief that businesses have massive bank accounts and they're just sitting on this money and they've got the money to spend. So why not force their hand to pay the folks who do the work instead of letting them just put it in the bank or give it out as huge bonuses to executives? That's a reasonable argument too, isn't it? No, it's not. Okay. So why would we tell folks that raising the minimum wage to 15 is probably not a good idea? As noble as it is to help people survive, why is it a bad idea? We've talked about why it's a good idea.
Because nobody wants to go to McDonald's and see a kiosk to order their food.
Okay. So one of the consequences of raising the minimum wage, we have to, as business owners, start looking at other ways of delivering the same service. And we just said that one of the assumptions is that I, as a business owner, am super wealthy and I've got all this money sitting aside, and all I got to do is just loosen my pockets a little bit and give some of it to people who deserve it and who have worked hard for it, because I'm not going to miss it, really. And that could be true for huge corporations, right? I mean, Walmart might have this big pool of money somewhere. Ford may have this big pool of money somewhere. But what is probably true of the typical McDonald's owner?
The typical McDonald's, I mean, granted, it's that their startup cost is astronomical, but they're not swimming in a whole bunch of money. They make money, but they're also having to reinvest it back into their franchise business.
Right. The typical McDonald's owner does not see the revenue that the McDonald's Corporation franchise has. All right, the folks on the senior board out in San Diego probably have larger cash coffers than the local McDonald's owner does, right? Because it's a franchise. It's an independently owned store, and they have their own cash flow without an awful lot of assistance financially from the corporate offices. Kenneth?
So something kind of just popped in my head, and I was thinking about it because when a long time ago, I used to work for this florist, and I would deliver flowers for her. I get paid under the table, and life was great. And she eventually sold her floral business to somebody else, and then it was sold, and so on and so forth. But while I can't see $15 an hour feasible for a company that has a listing of employees, it could be a boost to encourage people to get into small business where if you're working for yourself, you may not necessarily need to pay yourself $15 an hour, but if the prices of your products is competitive against a company that has to raise their prices to make up the difference in the increase in payroll costs, it does provide somewhat of a alternate opportunities for entrepreneurs.
Okay. All right. Your sound has kind of gone out again there. Whatever you were saying right there at the very end, I didn't get. But that's a couple of good thoughts there. Typically, if I'm a business owner, I project my revenues based upon trends and patterns and reasonable assumptions. And of those revenues, I have to spend some of it on our cost of goods sold. You remember all your accounting stuff, right? And that leaves me with a net to work with. And there's taxes, and there's all these things, and there's salaries. And that revenue number doesn't change dramatically. No matter what your labor costs are, that revenue number is probably pretty consistent, pretty flat, isn't it? So if you've got 10 to work with and your salaries are 2, the fact that we've changed salaries to 4 doesn't necessarily mean that your revenues has gone from 10 to 12, does it? You're just having to reallocate the money that you had to spend on these things differently. But one of the false assumptions is that it doesn't really have an impact on the business as a whole. But reality is that if I have $150 to spend this hour on wages, right now I can pay 20 people $7.50 an hour. If you make me raise the minimum wage, I can only afford to pay 10 people $15 an hour, can I? Unless I can find some extra money somewhere, or I give away some of my small profits, which is probably the case with most small businesses. So if suddenly I can only pay half as many people, what are my options?
The people that you have to be able to produce as much as 20 people.
The 10 that I can afford to pay 15 have to produce as much as the 20 who I paid $7.50. Right. If you're in that group that's lobbying for 15, is it part of your thought process that once you get 15, you're going to have to work twice as hard? Probably not, right? I would tend to think that some of those people might be expecting that a little bit more is going to be expected of me. But it's not a mathematical relationship of pay me twice as much and I'll work twice as hard. You need to pay me 15 because I'm worth 15. But expecting anything different is unreasonable to some folks. That's not a fair rule across the board.
Well, and in the articles that I've read, these people are like, oh yeah, I'd be willing to work a little bit harder, but I don't think that they truly comprehend trying to do the work of two legitimate people. Like, it's if trying to earn the 15 by working double, eventually you're going to get to a point where it's just like, you know what, this is not what I thought it was going to turn out to be. I'm too tired to spend all of the extra money that I'm now required to earn.
Right. It's an interesting discussion, though, isn't it? If I've got $15 to spend this hour, and I cannot afford to pay both of you 15, I come down to a decision: do I pay you 15 or do I pay her 15? And one of you goes, because I can afford to spend $15 this hour. And I think as much merit as there is in the argument that the poorest need to have a better living wage, I think that the arbitrary 15, as it seems to be, is a poor strategy. That the movement would have had a whole lot more traction and buy-in if we had been talking about going from 7 1/4 to 9 over a couple of years, as opposed to 7 1/4 to 15. That's a little too dramatic, I think. I think very few people in society would argue that we don't need to do something about the minimum wage. It really becomes an argument when we start talking numbers that are so significantly different. Lauren started to say something.
Well, when I was looking at like how the minimum wage has been raised over the years, like it was never like a big, like, because I believe when it was raised from 725, it was 650 or somewhere in that range, and it jumped up to 725. So, and then going from 725 to 15, that's just a big, like, that's a drastic change where, going from 650 to 725 at 75 cents. I mean, 75 cents does add up, but I mean, that's just a bigger difference going from one to.
Okay. Historically, we've seen small jumps. Yeah, Kenneth.
Well, then I also have to keep in mind is, like, when I'm trying to, if I'm at work and I'm trying to push something that may not be popular, you give them something crazy, and you kind of antagonize people to meet you halfway. So it may not necessarily be that we're trying to actually get $15 an hour. It starts the conversation to where, well, okay, 15 may be too high. What about 10 or 11 and something more reasonable? And you won twice, because now you sparked the conversation, and where what you were trying to achieve, what might not necessarily have been 15, and I know I'm quoting something from a previous class, I just can't think of the title of it, but you still won because you were able to move the needle at all.
And I think in general that makes sense, and that may be the theory or the motivation behind the folks that started the conversation. But unfortunately, I think that once that number of 15 gets out, that most of the people who are out holding signs aren't looking at it from the perspective that this is the starting point. We're going to negotiate and settle for 12, or we're going to settle for 9. For a lot of the folks who are out making the noise about raising the minimum wage, it's 15 or it's nothing. And if you're not willing to give me 15, there's something wrong with you. What have you seen in areas where they have already adopted this? What seems to be happening?
Prices of other things have gone up, like
Okay.
consumer goods.
And that makes a lot of sense. If I'm running that hamburger shop or I'm running that dry cleaner, and my salaries and wages have doubled in some case, I've got to charge more to clean this shirt, don't I? Got to charge more for that hamburger because I got to make back some of the cost of that somehow. Because contrary to popular belief, I don't have a huge bank account that I can pull this out of. And even if I do, I can't do it for an extended period of time. What's the likelihood that once people kind of get into the right situation, that they're going to say, okay, we're cool now, we can drop it down to 12? Salaries never go down, do they? Once we establish a number, they don't go down, or only on very rare circumstances, not across the board. So once we start bumping it up, whatever buffer we had in that bank account is going to start drying up unless we do something to increase our revenues. What else has been happening in some of these areas, Kenneth?
One interesting note that I read was that in an attempt to control costs, managers were taking on an even greater portion of, I guess you could say, prior duties, because where they're on salary and they're exempt employees, they can work, 40, 50 hours where it doesn't create an additional labor cost.
Okay. Assuming that they were more than 31,200 to begin with. Because if they were salaried at 28, they're below minimum wage now. But yeah, they would take on more responsibilities, which eats into the management role, which we would argue has to be there in order to provide vision and growth and opportunity. What else was happening in places like San Francisco, Seattle, where they're already increasing minimum wage? Somebody mentioned one of the consequences already about when you go to the counter. Somebody talked about a kiosk a little while ago, right? We start to introduce technology. If we can find a machine that'll make a hamburger and will make it the exact same every single time, would I rather spend, as a business owner, would I rather spend $20,000 to buy a machine as a one-time expense, or to pay out higher wages to low-skilled employees in a lot of cases indefinitely? Well, I may be willing to invest in the machine, which cuts my need for people. So one of the consequences that we see to especially a large increase in the minimum wage is that we start to see folks who no longer have jobs. And the argument that a raise in the minimum wage is going to help people is true for the ones that it helps. But it probably hurts an equal number as it helps. And the amount of hurt is significantly greater than the amount of help. The person it helps goes from $7.25 to $15. But the person it hurts goes from $7.25 to zero. And that's a big hurt. And we've got an awful lot of people potentially who are even worse off than where we started. Are the 15s sharing with the zeros who lost their jobs? Probably not.
Mm-mm.
Probably not. If I'm flipping burgers at $7.25 and I get a raise to 15 and my buddy gets laid off, I feel bad for you, but I'm probably not sharing any of that 15 with you.
Yes, but he's also paying taxes on $15 an hour, which I'm sure through some shape, fashion, or form his buddy will be able to partake.
So the government still is helping people out, which was one of the arguments why we need to raise it, is because the government will be doing less of that. Maybe fewer people, but larger amounts, which probably ends up balancing out to about the same. So one of the consequences of the minimum wage raise is that we start to see more automation and more technology, which requires fewer people. Part of it is that we just simply can't afford to pay that number of people that amount of money, so we have to lay some people off. So there's hurt for some and there's benefit for some. So what's the right answer?
Well, the other thing that I thought of, and somebody else might have already said it, is not every business is going to be able to afford $15 an hour. Not every business will remain open at the end of the year. They may see the $15 coming and go, you know what? It's inevitable. It's signed in the law. We're shutting down shop. That demand hasn't gone anywhere. The demand shifts to the next business. So that, I guess, would be my counter argument to the zero net change in revenues, because $15 an hour may bring additional revenues, but it's at the end of the day, you're still only going to be able to pay X amount of people because the minimum wage is more than double.
Okay. We're pushing up on 9 o'clock. We need to kind of wrap up the phone call here. What other thoughts do you have related to the topic this week? Have you gotten any ideas you can use on a discussion board with the folks who haven't been on the call?
I think the only point that I had written down that I didn't say, and amongst all the other stuff that I did say, is will raising it to $15 have an effect on inflation?
What do you think? Any one of you? That's a hard one, because inflation has a little bit to do with supply and demand, and neither one of those things really changes based on wages. Some people have more money to spend, which theoretically, with more money in the economy, we can afford to charge more money. But there are other people with less money to spend, and overall the money has not changed. It's just redistributed a little bit. It looks like my internet is running slow and my picture has gone off screen. You'll probably be able to hear me but not be able to see me too well. My connection is poor right now. Well, Mr. Spry, you asked the question. What do you think?
Part of me wants to say there may be, but I mean, I understand that inflation is more than just, hey, we raised this and then now this other thing automatically goes up. But I would say if I had a vacuum-like thought and everybody got jobs at $15 an hour and the unemployment rate remained constant, and now all of these people have all of this extra money, it's like, okay, well, you know, there's only so many, let me think of something other than an iPhone. There's only so many Toyota Corollas, and if everybody's going up there to get Toyota Corollas, then they're like, oh, well, I could make a higher profit if I raise the cost of the car, since I've got all of these people coming up here anyway. And now that $1 is not worth $1 anymore. That $1 of yesterday is now worth $1. Is now worth 75% of what it used to be worth. So, but then that runs in conflict with the whole thought that, you know, if I pay Billy 15, but I have to lay Bob off, and then Bob takes the unemployment that Billy is now helping to pay for, is zero net sum. Nothing actually improved itself. And that's kind of where I'm sitting at in regards to the whole topic. I don't necessarily believe that this is the magic bullet that's gonna fix everything. I think that it's just going to muddy up the problem even more than what it is.
Okay. I would suggest, though, that if I've got 10 workers at 8 and they raise minimum wage to 15, I may try to find a way to keep 7 of them and let 3 go. But overall, my labor cost is going to go up. I've just shifted it from the 10 to the 7. But because there's 7 at 15, or 7 at 15 instead of 10 at $8, overall my costs have gone up, and I have to raise my prices. So yeah, there will be a little bit of inflation. Even though we're just shifting the money between people, we are actually increasing the amount, probably some, and we've got to make that back somehow through more efficiency or higher prices. As is the case with most of our weekly topics, this is a tough one, but this is pretty typical of what you deal with in human resources. There are not a lot of easy questions in human resources. There are arguments on both sides. And ultimately, the right answer is what makes the most logical sense, the most economic sense, what fits in best with our strategy at this moment in time. In some things, like a minimum wage, we got to do whether it makes sense or not, because we're told to. Now, if we're talking about what's the benefit of increasing our wages even though we haven't been told to, it's a different question, isn't it? We're doing it out of our own generosity, because it's the right thing to do, not because we have to. And we can be a little bit more, as I think Ashley was saying earlier, we can be a little more strategic in how we do it. And we can lay out the timeline, and we can lay out the amounts and the values and things like that. But when we're reacting to something, it impacts a whole lot of different things. It impacts the number of people we can employ. It impacts benefits, right? A lot of benefits are percentages of wages. Taxes go up. Unemployment goes up because it's all percentages of wages. So a lot of things go up. It's not just that 7 to 15. It's the benefits that go along with it. So it's a compounding effect. And Kenneth talked about the value of those benefits that are parallel to the pay. And all those things are part of the pyramid. All right, well, we need to let you go. I will apologize on behalf of Will. I'll check with him tomorrow and see whether he got caught up with something. He worked some pretty crazy hours because of his role at the hospital. He has mentioned one time before in an interaction with classes, as he is over compensation and benefits for a hospital system that has about 5,000 employees, the mathematical numbers tied to compensation and benefits means that he has a very direct voice in something like, seems like it was like 60 or 70% of the health system's budget. So, I mean, he talks about large numbers. I mean, in the hundreds of millions of dollars for that health system. And it's very possible that something has detracted him this evening, or it's also very quite possible that he just forgot all about it, because Will does that from time to time. But I'll check with him and see if we can get him on another call some other Tuesday night. And I appreciate your time. If you've got any ideas of what we might be able to do to get a few more people on the call so that you don't feel pressured so much to answer all the questions, I'm open to your thoughts as to what we can do. It may just be that Tuesday nights aren't real convenient, and it's not a big part of the grade, so it doesn't seem to be quite as big a deal if you don't make it. But I'm sure you would agree that having a few more people to participate in the conversation would make it a little easier on you. But we will shut down our recording. Hopefully it worked. If it did, we will put it out there so other folks